Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us today on Veterans Day for this discussion about organizing, political organizing, or organizing to generate public concern or action on an issue. In my life, whether I'm working at the university or doing political work in the field, or just having a conversation with friends, I'm often dealing with the questions, how can we affect change, or how can I affect change? And that's why I'm so pleased to be moderating today's discussion titled #Activism Will Not Save Us. The only way forward is to organize, organize, organize. And before we get underway, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Phil Dalton. I'm a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy, and I'm the director of Hofstra's Center for Civic Engagement. I'd like to thank some people for helping put this together today. Now, the event is organized by Hofstra's Rhetoric and Public Advocacy program. And we're thankful to Hofstra's Labor Studies program, directed by our panelist, Dr. Trasciatti, who is also a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy. And finally, nearly every event of this nature at Hofstra owes a debt to Hofstra's Cultural Center, its executive director, Athleen Collins, and its staff. Thank you all so much. We're very lucky to have our guests with us today. First, we have Mr. Mario Ferone. Mr. Ferone has been a political organizer for 4 years in Long Island political races. He's worked on state assembly races, state senate, and township races. His highlights include organizing for Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential run in 2016, Christine Pellegrino's special election to the New York Assembly in 2017, and New York State Senator Jim Gaughran in 2018 and 2020. We'll also hear from Saul Guerrero, who is a union organizer, representative, and negotiator with Local 228 RWDSU, the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. He's a cannabis workers organizer, and he comes from a retail management background and has always been an activist at heart. And this was cause for his transition to the labor movement in 2007. And we'll also hear from Dr. Trasciatti, who I mentioned is a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy and director of labor studies. In addition, she is the president of the Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition Board of Directors, a group that works to remember and educate people about the 146 workers who died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in Manhattan. And that became the rallying cry for the international labor movement. I'd like to begin with a few observations of my own about the value of organizing and to offer some of my own perspective. I've been working in and out of politics since I was 15, and whether I lived in the Chicago suburbs or was studying or teaching political communication in Oklahoma, Florida, or here in New York, I've always reached out to work with the local political party. And I've always found the experience disappointing. Political parties are these apparatuses that exist ostensibly to allow regular people access to the political system. Regular folks may help the party. They can canvass or make phone calls, lick envelopes, sort palm cards, you name it. As active members of their parties, they may also foster relationships with community groups, talk to their neighbors about local issues. But in exchange, those people also get some access to how the sausage is made. Maybe they can influence the agenda in their communities, talk about issues with the party that matter to them. Involving myself through the years, I've seldom seen, though, regular rank and file party members influence a whole lot of anything unless they had enough money to give to their party or be given consideration as a viable candidate. So what's a person to do? To effectively change anything, people have to speak with a collective voice. They need to coordinate. They have to row in numbers in the same direction. Frederick Douglass famously wrote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." But I often say, you'll never get anything. You'll never get what you don't ask for. But you won't necessarily get what you ask for by just demanding it. Asking and demanding are necessary, but not sufficient to affect change. We have to communicate from a place of power. And power is the outcome of organizing or building that collective voice. Regarding this, grassroots organizer Jonathan Smucker writes in Hegemony How To, "We can righteously shout slogans at the halls of power until we're blue in the face, but in the long run, we have to take responsibility for constructing the collective power needed to make our demands potent. And in my experience, there are a lot of things we're good at. We're good at identifying what's wrong with the system, finding problems and complaining about them. We're good at identifying the villains in our narratives, voicing our grievances, critiquing symbols, developing our own in-group languages and symbols, holding gatherings and protests, creating social media opposition, sometimes referred to as slacktivism. And while these kinds of activities can be cathartic, they can make us feel engaged or like we're accomplishing something, but they don't affect real change. The status quo doesn't change because you don't like it. The status quo changes because you have more power to change it than the opposition has to oppose you. For the purposes of this discussion, I just chose to pick 2 quick points about organizing that run counter to a lot of thinking that I encounter. One point looks inward at those who organize, and the other suggests looking outward at the larger culture. As for looking inward, those organizing have to distinguish between advocating, mobilizing, and organizing. Politicians, particularly on the left, are good at advocating and mobilizing. They aren't good at organizing. While mobilizing is getting the regulars to suit up, show up when it's time to, say, fight, organizing grows the group of regulars, but also works to transfer power from the elites to the rank and file. Jane McAlevey, in her book, No Shortcuts, writes, organizing places the agency for success with a continually expanding base of ordinary people, a mass of people never previously involved, who don't consider themselves activists at all. The primary goal is to transfer power from the elite to the majority. What this means is that people who seek to change the system need to look at what they're doing. Are they relying on the same people again and again? Have existing participants become an exclusive club, an affinity group? Or is satisfaction derived from growing and nurturing new members and grooming members to lead? The other point is looking outward. And I think this is particularly relevant in a present context. Smucker recommends looking outward to recruit, to cause your message to resonate with the larger public. Influencing the larger public is the ultimate goal, so it's important to avoid alienating it. He writes, the starting place of the movement must always be society, rather than the movement's core. When our subcultures become too self-referential and incoherent to outsiders, then our words and actions may come to function as repellents to others. And he adds that to organize effectively, the mentality of a movement to define itself as distinct from the larger society has to make a 180-degree turn. We have to orient ourselves to connect with others, to notice commonalities, and to embrace being embraced by society. And I think these 2 points are important points to open our discussion with the public sphere as polarized as it is at this moment. It seems tempting to A, condemn those who think differently than ourselves, and B, to retreat to our safe places where others think like us. And those might be organizations, groups, or clubs that define themselves in opposition to the status quo. But if we're to understand what these experts are saying, that's the wrong thing to do, because we don't solve problems that way. We don't affect change that way. So let's now hear from our experts. We've prepared several questions, and we're going to go one at a time and let each member of the panel answer each. And as we do, if you, the audience, have questions, please post them in the chat. And at the end, we hope to have time to field those questions. So I'd like to direct the first question to you, Mario, and the same question for each of you. Can you describe, please, the organizing work that you do? You're muted.
You're unmuted now, Mario.
There you go. Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, no, thanks for that. So for me, it's primarily electoral organizing. So my goal has been, I've been working on, political campaigns. So it's a pretty clear goal. It's to win on election day. I think from that, you hope to grow a long-term, kind of volunteer base and kind of other leaders and organizers in the movement. But, most of what I'm doing has a very direct, like, can we get 50.1% of the vote on, a certain day?
So you're also muted.
He can't unmute. Can we unmute him? There you
Yeah,
go.
now you go. There you go. Same thing. I can't unmute myself until I'm giving the okay. So I do a different kind of organizing, but it all translates. At the end of the day, people are organizing for power, right? The organizing that we do from the labor movement perspective is, organizing people and empowering them to understand that they have more rights with what you said, Phil, with a collective voice. And most recently, the campaign that I've been working on for the last couple of years has been organizing the cannabis industry in New York State. And that's the medical cannabis industry for now, until adult use is passed. Hopefully, now that our neighbor, New Jersey, has passed it, hopefully we will pass it sooner. Obviously, the end of the organizing for us will be to organize the entire cannabis industry. And to Mario's point, they want to get 50+1. That's the same thing that we need to a smaller level. But every time that we organize a new shop, we need 50+1 to get a majority of the people there that say that they want us to be their collective bargaining representatives. So.
Great.
Oh yeah, so I'm with Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition. I've been working with this organization for over 10 years, and we're an ally of the labor movement. So we're based primarily in Manhattan, but we also have we're an international, transnational organization. We've got allies in Bangladesh, in Italy, all around the country, in other places around the globe. And essentially, what we do is we work with various organizations and individuals to educate about not just the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which killed 146 mostly young immigrant women and girls, but also about contemporary workplace safety issues and how the job of keeping workers safe belongs to all of us, and it's a never-ending job. And I just want to add to Phil's point, we do advocacy work. So we push for laws, we push for various kinds of initiatives. We do activate our base as well, so mobilizing work, but we also do organizing work, so we kind of cover all three bases. And while we don't do electoral work, we very much see ourselves as helpers or, again, allies to the kind of work that Saul and others in the labor movement do.
Thank you. We'll start again with Mario. Mario, one of the reasons I asked you to, you visited classes of mine, and we have you here today, is because I think I sequestered you in a corner at a meeting one time and asked you about texting as a way to organize. And you had all sorts of knowledge and training in that area. Is there special knowledge or training required for this kind of work?
Yes and no. I mean, it's, when I started, so I was involved in politics, with the local Democratic committee, kind of like how I met you, Phil, at a club meeting since high school. I didn't get my first, staff job or like an organizing job until the 2016 Bernie campaign. So I didn't have a lot of like the skills or like how to use the databases or like some of that until then. So it definitely can be learned. Either, the easiest way, and what you see a lot of people is they'll volunteer or, eventually join like a political campaign. But, or it could be an advocacy group, and you kind of get to learn as you go. I think the bigger thing is just, kind of the type of person, someone who is very long-term oriented by a goal, can put in the hours, and, a lot of it can be learned, I think, as you go.
Thank you. Saul.
Okay. So I think I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Mario just said. Yeah. One thing that one of my mentors told me when I started in the labor movement back in 2007 was, you have to have the right heart for this kind of work. Whether it's political or in the labor movement, you have to want to empower people, right? You can learn everything else. You can learn how to use the spreadsheets, and you can learn how to use, and read the information, but you have to have the right heart. You have to want to do this, because people read your energy, right? And when you're trying to organize people, if they don't see that you're really sincere about your belief in what you're trying to do for them through the labor movement, in my case, they are not going to jump on that boat. They just won't, because they're going to see that you're just giving them a spiel, kind of like a politician, and they're going to, yeah, no, that's not real. They have to understand that you're really there to empower them, to give them a voice. So, I mean, yeah, you have to learn certain labor laws of what you can say and what you can't say, because you can't make promises. You can only tell them what you can bargain for and stuff like that. So yeah, you do have to learn certain knowledge when it comes down to labor law, and that comes with experience and over time. And obviously, all labor unions have, attorneys that we could always, go to if we have questions. And with time, you become like an attorney, because you just deal with them on, on a one-on-one basis. But definitely, everything can be learned except for the wanting to empower people, I guess.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Marianne.
I applaud Mario and Saul for their comments, because I agree wholeheartedly. I'll just add a few things. So I think you need optimism, and I think that goes with Saul's comment about spirit. If you don't believe that things can change, you will not be able to affect change, because people will pick up on that, and you can't communicate with enthusiasm if you don't yourself feel like it's possible. I would add, as a professor of rhetoric, and that's how Saul and I met, actually, right, was in class. There are things that maybe aren't innate, but that you really need to learn. And you need to learn how to talk to people. And that goes to Phil, to some of the comments you made earlier about, how do you see the people out there? Do you see them as potential allies, or do you see them as enemies who have to be vanquished? I mean, there are enemies out there, let's face it, but there are lots of potential allies, and you need to learn how to adapt your message to suit the interests of those who would be your allies, who maybe don't agree with you on everything, but they do agree with you on the particular goal that you've identified. So you need some flexibility there. And I think you need energy. This is not easy work. One of the things that I'm doing for the coalition is trying to, we are going to build the first labor memorial in New York City. It is a memorial to remember the workers who died in the Triangle Fire, to remember the immigrant working class women. So it's very significant in that way. But also to remember the movements that were inspired by this disaster, that created ultimately the New Deal and all kinds of really terrific things that we enjoy. But that fire happened in 1911. It's 2021. We're on 2020. Sorry, we're on target to dedicate this memorial in 2022. So that's the final thing that I want to say, is that you need patience. You need to realize that you're in it for a long game. That you're not going to affect change overnight. And there's something that I hear young people who are new to activism say that I think is problematic, and their hearts are in the right place, but they say, it's not my job to teach you, or, I'm tired of saying the same thing over and over again. And the truth is, if you want to be an organizer, you have to say the same thing over and over and over again. And if you're tired of it, then you need to take a break so that you can come back and say the same thing over. And if I'm sure Saul has given the same spiel to more times than he can count. So it's not people's jobs to educate themselves. It's your job to educate and activate them if you're going to be a good organizer.
Thank you. I'm just thinking of another question, but I'm going to go with the one that we have here and come around to my question near the end. Mario, what are the greatest challenges you face as an organizer? And before I let you go on with that question, just want to point out, it seems like some of the dynamics for a political organizer may be a little bit different than the union organizing. And I'll let you develop on that if you care to. But what just seems on its face to matter here is, when you start reaching out to people, you're trying to get people you have the greatest chance of getting in to vote. And somebody who is union organizing is going to start there, but they're also going to want to grow beyond that group. I'm sure a partisan or party organizer is going to want to do the same thing, but it sure would be nice to have the capacity to do that. When you have a deadline you have to meet to get people to vote by, you may not have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah, I think it also, depends on kind of what you're doing. So one of the benefits I've had since the end of 2016, I've been working, different races and different campaigns, but all in the same area, all in Long Island. So I do get a chance to develop these relationships a little bit more long-term, because one of the things I learned actually on the Bernie campaign that they kind of drilled into us that I try to follow is, election day ends. Very possibly, if I'm working on a campaign, I'm going to leave the area, but those volunteers, we activated them, they should be able to continue doing this work. So, a good example is when I worked in New Hampshire for a few months with Bernie, we had a lot of volunteers who were active trying to oppose a gas pipeline. So a lot of them got to meet and find each other and like find this organized space because of this presidential campaign, but the day after the primary, we're leaving, we're going to shut down shop, but these people are still here. So kind of giving them the tool. So I think, and, on an electoral campaign, you have a shorter time frame, like you said. Your end goal is to get people activated fast and then start, getting the message out there because we have, a very strict end goal. But I think there's a way to incorporate that into a longer conversation, especially if you have people who are, in the same area, work in the same field. So it's definitely a short-term focus, but there is kind of room there. So I'd say, kind of like you said with the repeated training. It's the same kind of spiel. Every time we get a new volunteer, every time we get, even talk to a new voter, you're given potentially the same spiel, trying to read body language, trying to figure out who the person is and how to pass that message to get across to them. But yeah, it is a little repetitive, but a little shorter term.
Thank you. Saul. You're muted again. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there you go. I have to kind of wait again. So yeah, I think I would have to, kind of like same thing, say that change does not happen overnight. When you're organizing, I have given right now, just for the cannabis industry, the same spiel hundreds and hundreds of times when I've spoken to different people. However, you have to look at each group. As I go organize each group all over New York State, you always have to remember who your audience is. Because even though it's the same spiel more or less, you have to kind of like read the audience very quickly as soon as you start to talk to them and kind of like start to be able to change, based on the body language that you see from the audience, based on the questions that they start to ask you. I've come to see that different people throughout different parts of the state will ask different questions. They have different interests. But I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges has been here. And I think that this also happens in political organizing, is to have the people that follow you see the same, have the same view that you're trying to give them, right? So for us, it wasn't like, hey, listen, we just want to get more members and we're going to organize cannabis. The way that we started was telling people, listen, we were involved in the political piece of this. We were involved in passing the Compassionate Care Act so that this industry can even start. We saw that this industry has the potential to grow. And then with that, we didn't want this to become another Amazon or Walmart where these, companies come in with money from other states or from other people. Nobody from New York owns any of the big companies in New York right now, right? And we were like, so we don't want them to come and make all the money and the people that are working in industries making all that money get nothing. Like what happens in most of the big, retailers throughout our country, because of, corporations, they get all the tax breaks and they get all the help and workers don't. So the vision that we've created is to tell people, hey, listen, we are able to create a better industry for the first time, because this is the first time in decades that New York has an industry that's going to flourish, right? So, we're able to tell them, this is our vision, right? We're going to create an industry where even when you're up in, upstate in Syracuse, New York, where the minimum wage is like $12.75, you're making $18 an hour through our union contracts. So that's life-changing, right? You're getting free healthcare. You're getting benefits that they would never have otherwise. All of these companies would not give their part-timers any paid time off, anything. Through the union contract, now they all have everything. So it's literally changed people's lives, you know. So when people start to see that, we're also trying to create activists within these shops, people that see the benefits of being union. Now we try to, you know, cultivate them to come out and talk to new groups. So that's how we start to, you know, form a network throughout the whole state. We also use a lot of the, network texting and stuff like WhatsApp to keep our shop stewards, you know, communicated throughout the whole state. That has helped us a lot to continue to grow a network of people that are involved. So whenever we have like a lobby day in Albany, which hasn't happened lately because of COVID, you know, people that come out, because now we're talking of, hey, what are we going to do about adult use? How are we going to make this a place so that, you know, organizing can happen also in adult use? Because that industry will be 10 times bigger than what medical is right now. So the biggest challenge is to get people to buy on to the view that you have, right? To that dream, I guess. And once they can see that, it becomes easier to make them participate in that. Because if you're organizing people, it doesn't matter how much I can make the union sound great. If they don't believe in it, once again, they're never going to sign on. So that's the biggest challenge right now, I think.
Do you face like a cultural perception of unions as not in the interest of workers? Do you have to overcome that?
Yeah, that so when I go throughout the whole state, it depends where you are. So if you're in some parts like upstate where, you know, the union was, you know, uprooted because the industry left, some people think, well, the union didn't do anything for me. Not the union's fault. If the industry leaves, it goes across seas, can't do anything about it. But we have to break those stigmas of, you know, nothing happened. In some cases, actually, it works the other way around. Hey, like my dad was in the steelworkers or this and that, and, you know, that he's always loved being union. So it depends. And once again, that goes back to when you're an organizer, you have to be able to read who you're talking to and really quickly pick up on the little indications that they give you and try to build on those. Yep. But I do have to face that often, though. You know, there is always a stigma, I guess, with the unions. And that, just have to say this, that's also our fault, because as a labor movement, we haven't pushed for labor to be taught in schools, you know, I mean, talking about grade school and high school, you know, where they have to tell people that, you know, that our country was built on the backs of labor, right? And, you know, that we're not the enemy, because corporations, they do a great job teaching people about how to become bankers and financiers and this and that, but we don't do the same. So just my 2 cents there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Marianne.
Yeah, just to Saul's last point, you know, part of why we are the memorial that we're building, you know, will tell the story of the fire and will tell the story of all the movements, particularly labor, but also how the government responded. And in part why memorials like this, we have a huge conversation going on right now about monuments and memorials, and mostly about taking them down. But we, you know, I've been leading this project for over 10 years to build, and it's really hard to build a memorial. But one of the reasons why a labor memorial is so important, because I sometimes lie awake at night thinking, really, the money and the time, is it that important? It's because of the point that Saul just made. We don't learn about the struggles of working people in school. So the places that we can go to in public where we can learn about them are all the more important. And so we see our memorial in New York, not just as remembering something that happened before, but educating people so that they are more inclined to be open-minded about unions, so that when they meet someone like Saul or candidates like Mario's who are pro-labor, they are more receptive to the message. So there's kind of a big landscape here. But I would say the biggest challenge, first of all, for me, is discrimination. I love the labor movement with all my heart. It is a male-dominated movement. It is a white male-dominated movement. As women, our organization, listen, I always say if the Triangle Fire had killed 146 mostly men, there would be a memorial 100 years ago. So we're memorializing immigrant women, working class women. These are not people who are considered important. And we are primarily women doing this. And it's really hard to overcome that. So discrimination is real. The most virtuous campaigns and the most virtuous movements are not themselves always self-reflective. And so if you become an organizer and you get frustrated with your movement, I would say seek out other people in the movement who are like you, that you can share your stories with, and you can collectively work within your movement to empower people like you. We know, we know that there aren't a lot of women leaders in the labor movement, and Saul's great. This is not at all an indictment of him. He's terrific, but we know in part because of discrimination. So it's not just that we have these leaders and they have to deal with crap. It's that a lot of times women don't even rise to the top because of the crap they have to deal with. And then so women don't see other women in positions. They don't know the history of women. So that's one, discrimination, absolutely. I think the other thing that and I'd be curious to hear from Mario and Saul about this, is you have to be willing to make common cause. And this can be a struggle. There are people who share, maybe you need to narrow your goal enough, broaden it enough that it's not, like blinders, but be specific enough so that you can work with people who you may not agree with on other issues. And I think that's a big challenge, particularly when you're just getting into organizing, is you want good people on your side. But you also want to achieve your goal. And sometimes the people, so we have politicians, for example, who support the work that we do, who don't necessarily support other things that we would like them to support, right? Or maybe they're good on labor, but they're not good on some other things. Or maybe they're giving money to the Memorial Project, but they're not, giving money to other things that we wish they would. So you have to decide where your line of who you're willing to build alliances with. Because if you want somebody to agree with you on everything, you're not going to succeed. You have to know how to compromise, when compromise will hurt you and dilute what you're doing, but when it's necessary in order to achieve the goal. And I think just that this stuff takes a really long time, that you get a lot of no's before you get yeses very often. And so you have to be willing to be patient, and you have to take care of yourself and make sure you don't burn out, so that you can just keep grinding, because it's a grind. I think the things that people see, the celebrations, the really exciting rallies and events, that's the end product of months, sometimes years of organizing, of calling meetings and, setting up chairs or Zoom rooms or whatever it is. It's a grind, and you have to be patient with the grind and take the beautiful celebratory moments when they come, but recognize that that's not what you signed up for. It's a grind. It happens in little steps.
Thank you. One of the things that Smucker writes about is how symbols can alienate allies. And so I think this speaks to what you were talking about, Marianne, about finding or avoiding alienating potential allies to a coalition. And even if you look at the flyer we put around about this, it had the upraised fist in it, which if you're on the left, you look at that and you say, well, I get that. But if you're on the right, and you support gun rights, but somebody from a union comes to you and is festooned with signs that indicate, alliance on the left, you can alienate them. And I thought that was an interesting observation by Smucker. I mean, if you want to comment on that, you can, but I can move on to the next question. You're muted, Marianne.
And then go. I'd love to hear from my two co-panelists about, how do you organize people into a union who maybe have politics that are different from yours, or how do you get people to vote,
right.
Because it seems like Bernie, for example, was a candidate who was good at pulling people across these lines that we normally, I know this, that we normally associate with division. So I'd like to hear from my co-panelists on that.
Mario.
Sure. One, it's kind of interesting because whenever I talk on my side of things to people in the labor movement, they always kind of bring it up, and I think it's important. If a union endorses us, for example, and we do a canvas launch or a phone bank, they're there because our candidate's good on labor issues, but it's very possible, like a lot of times unions can't choose their members. So you have a broader coalition than say a campaign, kind of on that point, if I'm working on a local campaign and the candidate, is strong into gun reform, most people who are strong, like Second Amendment supporters, aren't going to seek us out. They're not going to come to us and volunteer with us because that might turn them off. Whereas, if we're working with either an organization or a union, we don't have that choice. They can't pick their members, and we're looking for the support. So I think it's kind of that too, is figuring out who your audience is as you talk to them. And you don't have to be disingenuous. It's trying to find the common ground. So I think what you said about Bernie, when I worked on his campaign, we'd always try to start off on that common ground. So, it could be, someone, when they hear $15 minimum wage in some parts of the country, it's a crazy idea to them. But then if you stop and say, like, do you agree that someone making, working 40 hours a week should have a livable wage. Most people can get behind that. And then you kind of build a conversation from there. So it's trying to find that seed of like common ground and then point them into the direction you're trying to go. So, start with something that most people can agree with, and then slowly build up and try to build your case of why, you're supporting some policy. But, volunteer organizing, a lot of times you're trying to build those alliances, but it's a little different because you're targeting certain people. But when it comes to talking to voters, you're trying to get every vote you can. So it's really important to find those, on local campaigns, a lot of times if I'm working in a very Republican area, you'll say there's no, partisan way to take out the trash or, pave the road. These are, everyday issues that people face. So I think it's a little easier. And then as you get a little more national in scale, or even statewide, and you start to bring social issues, that's where I think it's easy for those wedge issues and divisions to come into play.
Thank you. So
yeah, basically, I would agree with everything Mario just said. First of all, Mario, I had to tell you, I'm a big Bernie supporter. Just know that. I have to tell you that. But something that you said, Phil, yes, it's true. I mean, our members are very diverse. I mean, we represent members all over New York State. Right, I travel all the way up from here to Plattsburgh, all the way, up northeast and northwest. And as you can imagine, when I'm in New York City, it's very blue. But as I get up, north of Albany, it becomes very red. So we don't talk about politics when we're organizing. I mean, people do ask us, when we're organizing, well, are you Republican, are you Democrat? And I said, listen, our local 338. And we have a record, we have endorsed candidates from both parties on Long Island, as long as they're in line with working people. That's what we care about. So that's how I changed the subject with that question, so they can't pin us down on being one or the other. One, two, same thing, but to a smaller scale. I always say that political organizing is like art organizing, but just ours is just like a smaller scale, a smaller audience. But, when I'm organizing a cannabis company, just to give an example, one of the locations is in Brooklyn, New York. One of them is all the way upstate. The people that work in both of these locations are as far, apart as can be, especially right now with the political climate in the country. But, we talk about, hey, living wage, once again, is what you're making enough? Yes or no? Do you want free healthcare? One that you can actually use, because most of these companies offer you healthcare. But yeah, but the deductible is like $4,000, right? And you have to pay $350 a month out of the $12 that you're making an hour. Can you do that? No. So we offer them things that are good for all working people, is the way I see it. So people can jump on that a lot easier. It's a lot easier that, than with the political organizing where they have to, jump on bigger ideals. But the concept is the same. We're, talking about working class issues. And it doesn't matter what party you're in, what race you're from. We all have these working class issues. We're all working people. And I think that we could all get behind most of the things that we bring up. And that's why up until now, we've been pretty successful in organizing cannabis.
Thanks. Marianne.
I feel like I sort of said enough. I mean, we have, okay, this is being recorded. So I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The labor memorial that we're building is funded largely by the governor of New York State, I slip of the tongue, Andrew Cuomo. There are some things that Cuomo has done with regard to labor that are not so great, right? So what do we do with that? I've made a moral choice to remain silent. My criticisms of the governor, if I do issue them, are largely, they're largely private. They're personal. I do not speak as the head of Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition. I do not sign on to any criticisms of the governor publicly, because this is the guy who's making it possible for us to think about. New York is a labor stronghold in the US, and we have no labor memorials at all of significance, right? So Cuomo's supporting that. What do I do when he does something crappy? Well, maybe as a private citizen, I say, oh, that was really crappy, but I don't sign on. So I feel like, you have to choose your battles. If he did something that was extraordinarily nefarious, really awful, then maybe we would return the check. I mean, so you have to kind of figure out where's the line that's being drawn, and be able to explain to the people that you are working with why you're willing to work with this person on this issue. And that's been really a challenge. I will say that we've had meetings in the coalition where we've talked with community members too, and we've made decisions about whose money we won't take in conversation with others. So, you know, if you're a company that, like, we won't take, I don't care how much money Walmart wants to give to wash away the sins that it perpetuates against working people on a daily basis, we're not going to take their money. There are companies that contract their manufacturing to places in Bangladesh where the working conditions are horrific right now, and you know, where they have been for years. We're not going to take their money either. And so, because how could we live with ourselves, and two, how could we explain that to the people that we want to bring on board to this project? So I think it's all about deciding where you draw the line. You know, as Saul and Mario said, what we call the culture wars, they often get in the way of some of the things that we want to do, right? So if you want to work on a wage campaign and somebody wants to introduce an issue that's part of the culture wars, you want to bracket that off. And I think that's partly what's been happening right now too, is that we've been divided over some issues and lost track of what unites us. And I'm not saying that cultural issues are unimportant. They're extraordinarily important. But, you know, when Saul talks about, like, can you afford your health care? Those are the moments where we can maybe speak across these divides and make it possible to build the multiracial working class coalitions that we need to build. So I don't deal with the same issues that, say, Saul or Mario deals with, but I do deal with, and everybody deals with, you know, where is your line in the sand? What are the things you're just not going to talk about? Not because you don't care about them, but because, you know, they're going to do more harm than good.
Thanks. Next, I want to direct a conversation to social media. And the title of this is, in it, we mentioned hashtag activism. And I referred to it as the use of social media as slacktivism in my opening comments. But I had a conversation with a woman who's I don't know if I'd call her an organizer, but she's an activist out in Suffolk County. And her comment about it was, you've got to meet people where they're at. I'm not going to meet everyone that I need to engage face to face. And I'm not going to meet everyone I need to engage in social media, but I can't abandon it altogether. But I think for a lot of folks, I suspect there's the suspicion that by saying things in social media spaces that they're going to affect change. And I was wondering if you could all offer your thoughts about that. And we'll start with Mario.
No, I think 2 points. One, you know, as an organizer, we all have ideas of what we think is the most effective way to meet our goal. You know, for a campaign, for instance, prior to COVID, you know, my goal was as much as possible to get people to knock on doors, talk to their neighbors face to face, things like that. Not everyone is able or willing to do that, so it's trying to make compromise. You know, some people will make phone calls, some people will write letters, some people write postcards, some people won't do any of that. You know, so it's trying to build this, you know, group of volunteers, group of people who, you know, you're trying to push to do something that you think is most effective, but also have to meet them a little bit. And kind of to the social media point, I think what you said, you know, you see it a lot too, and it is frustrating, where you have people will say, like, oh, don't worry, I post to my Facebook friends, like, you know, don't worry, I do this, I do that. And in my mind, it might be the most productive thing. So, you know, my job is, how do I get them to go beyond that first step? You know, I've had, like, one of my favorite volunteers, you know, started out kind of like that, would kind of post stuff for us, do some social media, slowly started building that, you know, came in and knocked doors, came in and did some phone calls. You know, eventually after about a year, she started organizing her friends herself. And then she actually ran for office. So sometimes you see people who start out and they will only do, you know, things that I might find less productive. But for them, you know, that's a big leap. You know, maybe voicing their opinions at all is a huge step for them. So it's trying to find that balance of, you know, I have a short-term goal. I have 6 months to, you know, talk to 5,000 people. I need to start doing that. But if you get to, and I think it's kind of one of those things where if you're in this work, taking a breath, you know, stopping and realizing, like, all I think about 24/7 is a campaign. All I think about is this candidate. Like that's all I think about. Not everyone is like that. They have other things going on in their life. So it's trying to find that balance of how do you push people to kind of empower them, but also like respect their boundaries. And I think that's a challenge. But you know, if you have the time, you can kind of build those relationships. You can kind of get someone, you know, to push outside their comfort zone a little bit more and kind of help you that way. So I think it's easy to, you know, it's finding that act. Like I saw with COVID, especially because everything was virtual, it became very hard, at least in where I am, to try to get people activated because you don't have that face-to-face interaction. You don't have those big rallies to push them through. You know, you don't have these easy ways to get someone started that they feel comfortable about. So how do you get people to do more than what they want to do right there?
Thank you. Saul.
Yeah. Once again, I feel the same way. I mean, for organizing, the grassroots piece is just like so important. I mean, because remember, when you're organizing, for the most part, you know, you're searching for people that may need you and might not know that they need you yet. So sometimes we'll do something like we'll stand outside a store and we'll talk to people as they come in and out, you know, trying to connect with them and then, you know, ask them questions about, you know, their working conditions. And then that'll prompt them to think about, wait a second, yeah, I actually don't like this and this and this. And then they start to talk to you and open up to you. You can't do that via Zoom because you still don't know who you're looking for. So a lot of our grassroots organizing cannot be done via social media, just can't be done. However, we can use it once we have a lead. So in other words, if I've already met a few people and we were able to actually finish organizing 2 companies that we had already started because we already had our leads in these companies, we were able to finish it off with Zoom. So saying, okay, listen, we already met you guys once. Can you bring in 1 or 2 people to the Zoom call so we could talk about this some more? And then we were able to continue. But for us, at least, you can't really post something on Facebook and expect people to come and say, hey, I want to join the union. That's not going to happen. I mean, once in a blue, you might get somebody say, hey, can you tell me more about that? But that comes far and in between. That face-to-face interaction, that reading of each other's energies at a human level doesn't happen via online, sadly. So for us, it has dampened our organizing efforts after that. So we kept on organizing because we already had leads from the beginning of the year. We were able to finalize a couple of those, endeavors by April, May of this year. But then after that, we've been on a standstill when it comes down to actual organizing. You know, it's been, you know, more difficult. So definitely online tools can be used once you already have a group motivated. You know, you can have follow-up, you know, Zoom calls or conference calls, whatever it is. But to begin an organizing campaign when it comes down to, you know, grassroots organizing is, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but next to impossible, just, you know, just being online. So it's a different, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mary?
Here. You know, the funny thing is, and so I know Saul. Mario, we've never met, but I know people, Danny Hinton, you probably know, who worked on, okay, so we all know. I mean, Saul and I know a bazillion people in common. Phil knows Mario knows people that I know. The world of organizing in some ways is very, very small, right? And we're always looking to, somebody told me once, like 7 people do everything to keep the world going. And sometimes that feels like really true, right? So we're always looking to expand, always. And there are people, you know, who we don't know, who we need to reach out to. But I think, as Saul rightly pointed out, what gets people going is they feel something, right? So, and it's hard to get people to feel something with a tweet or a Facebook event. And we know the statistics on Twitter. What is it, like 90% of, or some ungodly number of tweets on Twitter come from some very small number of people, right? So it's not a democratic medium. Most people's tweets don't get even seen by other people. If you're not like Glenn Greenwald or you know, Bernie Sanders, you're not going to even get people to see what's going out there because of the issue of attention, right? So there's that. Like even if it did work, getting people's breaking through is hard. because there's so much competition. The other thing is my favorite, one of my favorite authors on social protest and social movements is a woman named Zeynep Tufekci. And she wrote this really cool book that I've used when I teach social protest. It's called Twitter and Tear Gas. And one of the things she points out about using social media is that it's great, as Saul and Mario have said, for some things. So look at how many people we got to the Women's March for the inaugural for Donald Trump. Holy cannoli, wow. There were like bazillions of women there. That's what social media is really good for. Something's happening, show up. But what social media is not good for, and I'm kind of repeating what, in some ways, what Saul and Mario have said, is for the kinds of conversations that you need to have in order to really get people engaged. And some of those conversations are really difficult. So how do you work out like differing visions and differing perspectives and differing approaches? You can't do that on Twitter. You can't do that on Facebook. You can't say to somebody, yeah, maybe you feel like the union abandoned your father when the company left, but here's what, you know, here's the real story. Like you can't have those difficult conversations that are so important to organizing. And for me, a lot of what I've had to do is raise money, right? And to bring people in who can work with us on raising awareness and money. And you can't do that. There are some conversations you just can't have on social media. And these are them. And we've all, I think everyone, students, faculty, organizers, you know, we've all had conversations on social media and then said, well, that was a mistake. This is something that really needed to be face-to-face, and that's pretty much primarily what organizing is. Can I just usurp the space for a moment? Because I've gotten some messages from students who say, how can students get involved? How can we learn more? And I'm sure Saul and Mario have information about that, or, you know, we can work up, like people can write to us. But I just want to say, if you're interested in some of the things that we're talking about, I direct the Labor Studies program. We have a course next semester, Intro to Labor Studies, Labor 1, and we're going to be talking about a lot of these issues. How do we deal with the, you know, intersectionality and how, you know, our working class identities or our identities as workers and our identities as women or Puerto Ricans or, you know, lesbians, how do those all intersect? And how can we build a movement that takes us forward? And Saul, I'm hoping you'll be a guest speaker in the class. So if you're interested in these kinds of questions, you can actually learn more at Hofstra. Look us up in the Labor Studies program, look us up in the Rhetoric and Public Advocacy program, because there's, you know, there's a lot of interest here, and I just want to take a moment to tap into that.
Yeah, we have a great question in the chat. How can college students get involved with campaigns and grassroots organizing in general? What would you recommend, Mario?
No, that's a good question. And unfortunately, a lot of times, and I think Phil has seen this firsthand, campaigns, local political parties, they make it harder than it should be to get involved. But, you know, I would say this is where I think online could be a good space if you know what you want to look for. So if there's a local candidate or elected official that you are really passionate about, you know, message them, say, hey, I want to get involved. If there's a local political party you're affiliated with or want to be affiliated with, you know, just give them a call or an email, and then I think that's the easiest way. Sometimes you hit a barrier that you shouldn't, but ideally, you know, that's kind of the first way to make contact. And also, ideally, these organizations should be reaching out to people directly, but I know that's been pretty hard with COVID.
Right.
Thanks. Saul.
Yeah, for the labor movement, I would say that a lot of labor unions throughout the state are always, you know, looking for people to volunteer. So if you really want to volunteer, definitely, you know, go online, you know, look up different labor unions and see what they're doing. I can't speak for all of them. I know that we, you know, take a couple of volunteers like every summer that come on and help us, you know, go out and do some organizing and do some other work with the union. Not sure how next year is going to look like for us right now because of COVID. I mean, our offices have been closed since March and they're still closed now. So we're doing a lot of our work remotely from home. But I mean, I would definitely encourage people to at least, you know, look us up and look up other unions within the UFCW. You know, they are nationwide. There's always opportunities for people that want to get involved.
How do you make a career of union organizing? You start there, work your way up?
So I was recruited, and I'll touch a little bit. So I used to be a retail manager, but like you mentioned at the beginning, my heart was always into activism, and I would get into arguments with my corporate because they would not allow me to treat my employees better. And then one day I met the vice president of another local, which heard some of my exchanges with my employees, and I was lucky enough to be recruited. But I mean, a lot of people that I know in Local 338, for example, which is a very diverse union, they started as volunteers over summer. They did a great job. Then they were put on as part-time staff. And now a lot of them are union reps or fund reps, and they have a full-time job at the union. You know, unions like people that have, you know, that drive, because you have to be like auto-sufficient, right? Because when you're on the field, nobody's watching you, you know. You have to do your job, you know. So I mean, a lot of people I know have come up to the ranks at Local 338. So I mean, just volunteer first, or some unions are hiring, you know. And if you have a background in many things, you could be a fit. So you never know. Yep.
Grant, you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just say also know what you have to offer. You know, what are your strengths? So if you're a really good writer, or you're a really good speaker, or you're really good with math, or you're really friendly, or you're very organized, you know, make sure that you or try to get a sense of what it is you can offer to an organization, because they have needs, and it's easier for them to know if you fill their needs if you know what you can do. So that's one place. And I would just say, you know, ask people. I think as some of the people on this in the audience might see, your professors have interests and experiences outside of just professing. So turn to the people, you know, who you see around you and say, you know, I'm really interested in this. How can I get involved? Like, just ask, right? Go online, look for organizations that are doing the kinds of things that you're interested in. But take advantage of everything that's in front of you, and also, again, be self-reflective and know, you know, what you have to offer, but also what you're interested in. You know, I think at least I'm not going to speak for Saul, but for example, if you say, oh, I just want to volunteer to do something cool, it's a little bit different than if you say, look, I'm actually interested in workers' rights, or I don't know, in healthcare, for Medicare for all, or whatever it is, right? Have a sense of what you're actually interested in, what you can bring to a volunteer situation. Or an intern. I have mixed feelings about internships for credit, because essentially you're paying the university. Again, this is being recorded. Oh boy, you're paying the university, and a company's getting free labor. But you know, that's also an opportunity to. There are lots of union summer programs, for example, or not lots, but there are good union summer programs. Hofstra has
That's amazing.
An internship structure in place that you can use. If you have to do an internship, make it one that speaks to what you're interested in.
Great ideas. We have one other question in the chat, and I think we can close on this. And it is, what strategies have you used to recruit, to appeal to non-traditional volunteers, Black, Indigenous, people of color?
That's my excuse. I'm sticking to it.
All right.
Yeah, sure. So that's always been a challenge, bringing in new volunteers, people who normally aren't in tune. And even just one of the issues, you know, that comes up time and time again every year on campaigns, you know, we're targeting, and this is, I think, where a lot of people went wrong, either in 18 or this year. You know, so when you start like a political campaign, you're trying to figure out, what do you expected turnout? How many people do you think are going to turn out? Say 100,000. You know, if traditionally 100,000 people turn out, now it's like your goal is to get a little over 50,000. So what happens is every year campaigns will look at people who have normally voted, and they'll target them for their efforts. You know, so if you're not an active voter, you're not getting the mail, the phone calls, and the other you know, messaging that to bring you out to vote. And so now, because you're not voting, you're not getting these messages, you're less likely to vote. And because you're less likely to vote, you're not going to get the message in the future. So it kind of makes this like downward spiral, where I think, you know, if people aren't already engaged, they kind of fall off the radar of traditional political campaigns. And this is on the volunteer side as well. You know, if I'm going in, I have 6 months to try to win a campaign, I'm going to start with people who have volunteered in the past, start with people who have done it in the past, have shown an interest. And there are plenty of people out there who, if I had the conversation, I'm sure would be able and interested and want to get involved. And it's always that struggle of capacity, time in, and then, how, so I think people revert to what they know. And I think kind of same thing, I'll be the first one to say, like, I'm from Plainview on Long Island, a very white area. So, my network of people I know is going to be a lot whiter, a lot, people who look like me. So trying to get that across, I think on our end, a lot of times it turns to organizations, other allies in this to see, can you help bring people to us or help us get in front of people so we can share our message? Because otherwise you have this, same thing with talking to voters, talking to volunteers, you're talking to the same people, which, means you're not getting other perspectives. You're not hearing, what people can bring to the table. You're not seeing that. And I think, far too often you see candidates or parties, they either take their voters for granted or they don't try to expand the electorate just because that's not what they're used to. So trying to break that is definitely hard. I think with COVID, it made it much harder this year. Because you can't do a lot of the stuff that might broaden your appeal. You can't go knock on, every person's door. You can't go to train stations and try to talk to people on their way to work. You lose a lot of that. So now you're engaging online, and if someone doesn't already follow you or isn't already paying attention to your page, it's hard to reach them, even harder.
To that, Mario, I've said to classes, I've also said this in the field, that people do what they see or realize has value to them. And as, say, folks on the left may reach out to, as the question says, non-traditional volunteers, non-traditional volunteers may look back and say, well, what's in it for me? And I don't see a history of the party delivering for me. So the messaging can be there all it wants to be, but until there's some follow through, the message is not going to really connect. Anyway, Saul, would you like to add something?
Well, I think that in my line of work, I don't really have an answer for the question that you just posed right now, because it's not like we get volunteers. I mean, when we organize a group, and that group is already there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I do want to point out, just because I know that Marianne said something earlier and it kind of ties into this, is that the labor movement is a lot of white males, and that is true. But I have to commend my local, and I've been with my local for going on 4 years now. But what I love about our local 338 is that about 20 some years ago, our president saw that. He sat down and he saw that everybody looked like him, right? And he's a white Italian male. But now when you sit down at a staff meeting, it's this rainbow of color, and I think that a lot of unions need to start to, change their rank and file, because they need to look like the members that they represent, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. So but that's something that I do see happening little by little. A lot more unions are becoming more inclusive because they realize, just like, once again, the bigger scale to politics, right? The people that are leading us in politics don't look like the people that they're leading. Same thing here. And that's why we have a lot of disenfranchised Black and brown people. A lot of them left the Democratic Party right now, right? And voted for the opposing party because they felt, well, we've been Democrats all this time and nothing's ever happened because the people that are leading us don't look like us. They don't care. So once again, to a smaller scale, I see a lot of unions are making an effort to change. Not all, but I do see a lot of them making that effort.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Marianne?
Yeah, just convince people truthfully that there's something in it for them. I mean, if you're asking people to, if you're trying to reach out to people, there's got to be a reason why they would work with you. And I think, having deliverables for people is a great motivator. And as we've heard, you have to overcome reluctance because they're used to hearing that. But you just have self-interest motivates us, right? And no matter who we are, ultimately it's self-interest. It's other things too. But if you want to diversify, we're able to work with people in Bangladesh. Why? Because they have to deal with the horrific workplace safety conditions in garment factories right now, and that's there's something in it. We're looking at embarking on a campaign with coal miners in West Virginia about black lung, because that's a horrific illness that's a workplace safety issue. And so we're going in a few different directions. And the way we'd say it is workplace safety is an issue that affects everyone, and you know, people of color, women, people who are relegated to the margins, not because they deserve to be there, but because they're just pushed there, often have the most dangerous occupations, right? And so, you know, we there's something in it for them, and that's as it should be, and just convincing them of that, I think, is the challenge, and then delivering.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Listen, that's sort of a wrap. I want to thank the audience, all of you, for showing up and spending time with us. I want to thank our three guests, Mario, Saul, and Marianne. This was recorded, which means it ought to be up on the Hofstra University YouTube page soon. And so you can check for it there if you want to share it with others. And if any of you have follow-up questions you'd like me to direct to any of our panelists, feel free to email me. You can find us at the university website, and I will gladly forward your question to our guests.
I'm putting your email in the chat.
Oh, good idea.
Oh wait. If you want more information about any of this, you can email Phil, Dalton, or me, and we can pass your emails on. Don't hesitate to reach out if you want to be involved in some of the initiatives that we've talked about, or if you just want to learn more. We're happy to connect you.
Great. Thanks again for being with us.
Jamel has a question. Do we have time for one last question?
Can we squeeze one in there? Jamel, you're muted, sir.
Oh, he can't.
You gotta let me speak. Hi, can I ask a quick question of Marianne Trasciatti?
Sure.
You spoke about the need to tell people the truth, to have them see their self-interest and how it motivates them to want to get actively involved. What do we say to a large portion of this country who voted, a lot of poor white individuals who voted against their self-interest in this previous election? What kind of rhetorical appeals can we use, or what techniques of persuasion can be used to try to get people to see their self-interest and then get involved in some of the activities you guys laid out?
Well, I think I don't know if I agree that they voted against their self-interest. What I think is that they perceive their self-interest differently than I do. And so what we need to have a conversation about is, how do you perceive your self-interest, and how can we kind of connect? And again, I think some of the issues that Saul and Mario talked about, you know, who doesn't want to make more a living wage? Or who doesn't want a healthcare plan that that will, you know, take care of them when they're sick and won't bankrupt them? And it may be that they didn't see anybody offering that, or they didn't believe that it's possible for that to be really real, and that's what we have to overcome. I don't know that they're voting against their self-interest so much as they're voting against what I believe their self-interest is. So that's the first conversation I would have. Is what is your self-interest as you perceive it, and where can we meet on that? And Saul and Mario, if you have a response, I welcome it, because you are more experienced than I in that way.
So I think what you said is pretty spot on. Is because this is a frustration I have all the time, where you're working on issues. You know, a good example, I think it was Florida. There's been a bunch of ballot referendums that were on the ballot this year. So I think it was Florida passed, you know, $15 minimum wage. And it's crazy because this, in my mind, I would perceive, you know, 60% of the voters went and voted for a $15 minimum wage, but then voted against the presidential candidate who has that in their platform. So clearly there's a disconnect there. And I think what Marianne said was right, is maybe they don't believe, you know, if you're going out to vote for that proposition, you would think, you know, they're going to vote for the candidate who believes in this. And so sometimes that disconnect between what they believe is true, or maybe for them a different interest, you know, is more pressing. So it's trying to have that conversation with people. And I think that's the most effective way is, you know, if there's a voter who voted for someone and you're not sure why, ask them. You know, I think it's hard not to make, you know, try to you have to put yourself in their shoes and try to have that conversation. I think that's the takeaway for me, is figure out why they voted that way. And then, you know, if your job is try to get them to vote a different way, you have to start from there and then try to redirect.
I spoke with a candidate in this last cycle and asked, he's a Democrat. I asked him what he's taken away from the field. And he said, you know, I had a conversation with a union member who told me he was going to vote for a Republican. I asked him why. And he said, well, as far as I can figure, Democrats won't do anything for me, and Republicans won't do anything for me, but Republicans will protect my guns. And, you know, people can react to that and say, well, that's, you know, they might react to that, say that's nonsense, but you got to take folks where they're at. And if that person has not seen in their lifetime a union deliver for them in any substantive way, that calculus isn't entirely bad or wrong. Or if unions have done those things for them but haven't communicated it, that's on the union. So I think, to your point,
Yeah.
those things have to be communicated, and they also have to be real. But Saul, did you want to add something?
Just one thing on what you said about unions not doing a good job in communicating, and I think that you're totally right about that, and that's our fault. I think that a lot of our union members, especially the ones that have been union for a lifetime, 20 years, 30 years, they don't realize how people in a non-union industry or in the same industry have it. So they have this understanding that everything that they have is just the way it's supposed to be. So they feel that the union hasn't done anything, you know. But if they realize that one of the political parties, well, actually, no, I'm sorry, both of them have attacked unions. I can't say that one more than the other, but you know, but maybe that would change those kind of conversations. And once again, it goes back to what I said earlier about the labor movement not educating people as to how important the labor movement is for everybody, you know, and how important it has been in informing the middle class in this country and helping, you know, working people, you know, have some social mobility. So I would just say that.
Hofstra students, join the labor movement, spread the word.
We need it. Yeah.
Well, we got to close at that. There is a conversation tomorrow at 4:30. I don't have the link available.
Phil, we have a student who asked, we have someone who asked if the recording will be available. Can you tell people how this recording is going to be available afterwards?
I wrote there it should be within about 24 hours up
Oh,
the
sorry.
YouTube channel.
Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, thank you all for being here, and have a terrific afternoon. Thank you, Mario and Saul, Marianne.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.